Hi, my name is Spencer, and I am here today with Kaylee, Carson, Trey, and Sam. Today's presentation is going to go over the great toilet paper shortage of 2020 and the root causes of it. At the height of the coronavirus pandemic, there was one household item that every individual struggled to find at a certain point: toilet paper. The toilet paper shortages that could be seen across the United States during the worldwide pandemic were caused by an exponential increase in demand due to panic buying by the average consumer and more people staying at home to work virtually with school and business closings. A vast amount of manufacturing facilities are in areas with low population density and in highly remote areas, which makes it more difficult for toilet paper suppliers to be able to deliver their products in an efficient and effective manner. Additionally, the pandemic did create a need for the average consumer to purchase more toilet paper than they would under normal circumstances. The toilet paper market itself is divided into two segments: consumer and commercial. The sudden decrease in demand for commercial toilet paper forced suppliers to react swiftly to increase production of consumer toilet paper, which they were not accustomed to doing. However, since grocery stores and various retailers do not have much on-hand inventory at any given point, the sudden increase in demand caused by panic buying quickly depleted the shelves and led to stockouts across the United States. As a result, it led consumers to amass a large amount of toilet paper to hoard if there were supply chain shortages. Since many consumers were like-minded in this way, it led to a depletion of inventory that should not have occurred, taking weeks at a time for retailers to be able to replenish their stock. Due to this rise in demand, it will eventually lead to a surplus for many manufacturers and distributors who will be forced to slow down their production.
Thank you, Spencer. The toilet paper shortage in 2020 was not solely caused by a sudden increase in demand and panic buying, but it was largely in part due to suppliers being unable to adapt their production processes to meet the demand of consumer toilet paper use when the demand of consumer products increased exponentially. Logistically speaking, there was enough toilet paper for all consumers in 2020, but distributing the product to the correct places and the places that grocery stores or retailers needed it most is where suppliers ran into the most issues. The average American works for 8 hours and 11 minutes each day, meaning that they are actively using company facilities and commercial toilet paper during their time at work. Additionally, there are over 53 million students aged K through 12 in the United States, who before the pandemic would be in school for 8 hours each day, 5 days each week. Another 24 million students are enrolled in universities around the United States using dorm rooms and academic facilities during their time on campus. When we went into lockdown due to the pandemic, the average person saw their home bathroom usage increase by 40% due to people not being able to leave their homes. This caused a huge shift in demand from commercial markets to consumer markets. Supply chains needed to quickly and efficiently adjust to this major change, which has proven much more difficult than simply responding to an increased demand in a market that a supplier is already established in.
As a result of the great toilet paper shortage of 2020, the first issue that is made apparent is with the supply chain. When there's a sudden rise in demand, there will always be shortages. However, the specific issue arises due to a step in the supply chain process not operating at full capacity. To function at its full capacity, the suppliers must first seek out the bottleneck to figure out how or why the problem is an issue and at what step in the process the issue is occurring. Once we locate the bottleneck, we must decide the required number of workers in each step in the supply chain. If we add additional employees to a given step in our supply chain process, our bottleneck could shift to a different step. Additionally, we could add additional workers to a step and still have that be our bottleneck. The organization or supplier group itself will have to discuss their desired number of employees in each step of the supply chain to satisfy demand. Once we locate the bottleneck and figure out the number of required workers at every stage in the supply chain, we would then turn our attention to the other steps in the process to reference their utilization to see if additional resources are needed in other locations. After we search for the bottleneck, we can conclude that it revolves around the trucking capacity and the number of items that can be transported at one time, the warehouse space of retailers, and labor shortages that impact the ability to keep shelves stocked. By adding additional workers and or resources to a step in each process, it will allow the organization to increase its capacity, which in turn will increase the flow rate of the product. Once our bottleneck in a process reaches its optimal capacity and we increase our flow rate as a result, organizations can reduce their lead time, which is the time it takes from the start to the conclusion of a given process. Reducing their lead time provides organizations with leverage when it comes to setting their prices. When we refer to leverage, it is the degree to which a firm can set appropriate prices that enables them to cover operating expenses while generating a profit. For the supplier group, their transportation utilization was extremely low when the pandemic hit, with an average utilization of 51% in February 2020 and 53% in March 2020. Here, it becomes evident that the supplier group was not maximizing their trucking capacity, which in turn helped to further contribute to mass shortages across the United States.
So now we're going to pivot to some of the root causes of the shortages. So both the grocery stores and various retailers around the country, they didn't possess a lot of on-hand inventory. And of course, this was due to the delays in shipping the inventory, and then also the skyrocketing demand. On average, ships wait today on the coast of California 18 days before being able to unload their cargo. Even more so, their cargo ends up sitting there for several more days. But this is causing a big stunt in on-hand delivery for several grocery chains and also retailers around the country. And one thing that we really learned in class that helps kind of compare to this is the metric of order up to model. On-hand inventory is very important for calculating this measurement. And one thing that is also very interesting that we learned is if demand across the delivery periods is greater than the order up to level, there will be a back order of supplies. And that's unfortunately exactly what happened over the last 2 years, is with the intense demand combined with the closures of factories. This led to there being a large back order of toilet paper, and not only toilet paper, but a whole caveat of products. But with that, I'm going to pass it off to Kayla.
All right, thank you, Trey. So another really important factor when discussing the great toilet paper shortage of 2022 that also is something that we discussed in class is the concept of lean operations. So prioritizing a lean operation involves first creating a map of the process flow, identifying sources of waste, knowing and understanding the barriers to flow, standardizing procedures, balancing resources, and most importantly, letting demand drive the process. So a lean operation ultimately strives to reduce costs and waste to maximize profits and provide the most efficient operation possible. While this is a really important concept for businesses and operations to be successful, many people actually blame the toilet paper crisis on supply chains being too lean. So for a while now, companies have mastered lean operations, ensuring the minimization of overproduction and letting consumer demand drive the process. However, when COVID hit and demand spiked rapidly, there was just not enough inventory on hand. But that doesn't necessarily mean that overly lean operations are at fault. In the article, it's wrong to blame lean for toilet paper shortages. A professor at MIT, Yosef Sheffi, says that our supply chains did not fail. In fact, they experienced their finest hour. Lean was not the culprit in a period of disruption. Lean can be the solution. So the misconception is that this constant endeavor for lean operations leaves no wiggle room for companies to adapt to change, and consumers end up paying the price. It might be though that lean only benefits corporations in their attempt to reduce costs and maximize profits. But this actually isn't further from the truth. It was the lean supply chains that had the processes in place to adapt to change and demand, to remodel their processes to focus on consumer rather than commercial markets, It was the lean supply chains that were able to make a rapid turnaround and meet consumer demand in a time of need.
Thank you, Kaylee. And to conclude, we can see that due to mass school and business closures, in tandem with panic buying from consumers, caused mass shortages across the United States. Additionally, supply chains were forced to move their production processes from commercial to consumer demand in a very short time. We can also see that the supplier group had underutilized their transportation capacity, and retailers lacked enough on-hand inventory to satisfy demand. And lastly, as a result, we can see that manufacturers have become more resilient. And here is our references cited. Thank you very much for listening.